मेरा प्रस्ताव है कि इस लीडर्स डिक्लेरेशन को भी एडप्ट किया जाए।
All countries have unanimously supported the New Delhi Leaders Declaration.
आप सबकी सहमति से
The 2023 G20 New Delhi summit will be earmarked as a moment of great diplomatic importance. It achieved a joint communique or a 100% consensus declaration with all the leaders despite a war being ravaged across the Black Sea in Ukraine. The world is battling inflation, a cost of living crisis in many parts continues to loom, and the world is also dealing with tighter monetary conditions.
हमारी टीम्स के हार्डवर्क से और आप सभी के सहयोग से नई दिल्ली G20 लीडर्स समिट डिक्लेरेशन पर सहमति बनी है। मेरा प्रस्ताव है कि इस लीडर्स डिक्लेरेशन को भी एडप्ट किया जाए।
Any conversation about the New Delhi summit must begin at the declaration. And the declaration was achieved on day one itself, a 100% consensus declaration with no footnotes, no disagreements from any of the countries, despite the presidential absences of two countries. And in these 83 paras that came about in this declaration, we saw 8 of them being outlined towards the geopolitical tensions that are in Ukraine. It was about managing the food insecurity that is emerging from that, the energy insecurity emerging from that. And, notably, I found that it differs from its predecessor, the Bali Declaration, on one count, being the fact that none of the G7 countries nor its allies have opposed in strong words or exacted any sort of condemnation against Russia, which we find in the Bali Declaration. In fact, it asks for unequivocal and almost an immediate withdrawal from the territory of Ukraine in the Bali Declaration. We don't find that here. In fact, there is no mention of Russia too in that particular 8 paragraphs, except on the part of food and energy insecurity. So these were some things that stood out immediately for us and of course for all the international media.
The New Delhi Leaders Declaration has 83 paras in all. All 83 paras have 100% consensus across all countries. All countries have unanimously supported the New Delhi Leaders Declaration. This is one declaration without a single footnote and without any chair's summary. This is a complete statement with 100% unanimity.
Janani, the second takeaway that one must bear mention of is the inclusion of the African Union, right?
Indeed.
That's a massive, massive step that India has taken, again, to cement its voice as the leader of the global south as well. Again, the G20, we could see G20 going from G20 to G21 as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Before this, it was just South Africa, part of the African continent that was in the G20. Now, with the African Union, which is a rotating, council presidency, much like the Europe, it gets a permanent status, but it will be the other bloc nation,
Exactly.
a 55-member bloc nation that will be a part of this.
सबका साथ की भावना से ही भारत ने प्रस्ताव रखा था कि अफ्रीकन यूनियन को G20 की स्थायी सदस्यता दी जाए। मेरा विश्वास है कि इस प्रस्ताव पर हम सबकी सहमति है। आप सबकी सहमति से
Another thing that emerged, which is of a lot of importance, is the India, Middle East and the Europe mega economic corridor. Now, it's quite a mouthful, that terminology in itself, but what it means to show is about how there is a new economic corridor, a new trade route that is coming into play. This has been linked to whether it's a competition to the One Belt, One Road initiative of China and what it tries to achieve. But what we know as of now is the member countries that are in this alliance. We have India, we have Saudi Arabia, the United States, United Arab Emirates, United States also. European countries, we have Germany, Italy, France. We also have the European Union, who's part of this, this economic bloc.
आने वाले समय में यह भारत पश्चिम एशिया और यूरोप के बीच इकोनॉमिक इंटीग्रेशन का प्रभावी माध्यम होगा। ये पूरे विश्व में कनेक्टिविटी और विकास को सस्टेनेबल दिशा प्रदान करेगा।
Like you said, it is being sort of built as a counter to China's One Belt, One Road initiative. It also had similar objectives, but in the words of Turkish President Erdogan, and I quote, this is what he said, that this is like a continuation of the historic Silk Road. So, which is a very important statement that he made.
This is a corridor in which our Prime Minister's vision of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas is very clearly ingrained right from the beginning, right from the conception of this project. So each country can look at its own needs, and basis those needs and requirements, the project can be then designed. Secondly, because this project is highly bankable, many multilateral institutions are willing to fund it, sovereign funds are willing to participate in it, private equity is willing to be a part of it. The transportation itself will bring so much revenue to this corridor that it will be able to pay on its own without getting the host country into a debt trap.
I think another major announcement that came from the summit was that of the Global Biofuel Alliance. India actually urged all these G20 nations to join the initiative, and also the major plea was to take ethanol blending with petrol globally to about 20%.
Yeah, so, these major changes, now we've listed out 4 here, but what it does is build a larger narrative of the kind of topics that India wanted to bring about as the global south. And I think the establishment of the Global Biofuel Alliance, and the Prime Minister has only urged, and we've seen only about 19 countries and 12 other organizations being a part of it, accepting it so far. And we can only hope this clarion call will only grow louder from here.
Let's talk about the key bilateral takeaways now. Though G20 is a multilateral forum, it also bears the inadvertent advantage of there being a lot of bilateral meetings that can happen on the sidelines of the summit. On day 0, prior to the formal commencement of the summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi held bilateral meetings with the US President Joe Biden, Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, and Mauritius Prime Minister Praveen Jagnnath. On Saturday, that was day 1, he met UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. With Sunak, he accepted another offer for a detailed bilateral meeting, and also expressed interest to sort of fast track the free trade agreement with the UK.
That's right. That was day 1. But day 2, it began at Rajghat. There was a change in venue, after which there were also other bilateral meetings. There was one session of the summit, but there were bilaterals with French President Emmanuel Macron. There was a meeting with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. And much later in the day, on the sidelines, there were meetings with South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol, Turkey's President Erdogan, who addressed the media too later that day, African Union President, the newest inductee into the G20 leaders table actually, Azali Assoumani, alongside the European Union heads, of course. So this was pretty much the meetings that happened on day 2. Being the host country comes with a host of advantages. Showcasing one's advantages in terms of, be it the priorities for digital infrastructure, be it for financial inclusion, or showcasing India's culture. And we saw all of that on display at the G20 too.
The frictionless credit basically tries to remove the friction between the lenders and information providers. So therefore, it obviates the need of one-to-one multiple integration with multiple information providers.
We have showcased 3 things. One is the UPI One World, one is Rupee on the go, and one is the BBPS, because these have some unique features which are not otherwise easily available. So that is what we are showcasing, and the experience so far has been very, very positive. A lot of enthusiasm at the very highest level has been shown, and that is obvious from the footfall that we have had, and especially the UPI experience that we want the delegates to have by onboarding them onto the UPI One World, that we expect and hope will translate into more and more countries showing interest in having a collaboration with our UPI stack.
And on the first day, after the joint consensus declaration was announced, We also saw that the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman highlighted the finance priorities. Now, the G20 emerged as an economic grouping, so their finance priorities are of much importance, such as the strengthening of multilateral development banks. Now, a call for bigger, better, stronger MDBs was heard loud and clear from this particular G20. A debt resolution framework for some of the debt distressed countries was also taken up. In fact, we found 4 countries getting that. Sri Lanka also, which is not a low-income country, a middle-income country, but that also got some sort of a debt relief framework that all these countries have agreed upon. You know, there's also an agreement that now in the next meeting that is expected to happen in October, which will be the last finance ministers and central bank governors meeting, these topics, especially the MDB's independent expert group review, their final report, or the crypto framework. This has been a much debated topic, in fact, whether in fact a cryptocurrency regulation would come out. Now we know a framework has come out, which means countries can take positions of either regulating it or and which amount of regulation that they want to choose is something in their purview. All of this in the Marrakesh meeting, and this is something we'll have to watch out for.
Right. In terms of other very, very important outcomes that have come, even in the joint declaration, I think one of the key highlights is the furtherance of digital public infrastructure. For the first time ever, a common definition and framework has been agreed upon by G20 nations. And so I mean, it sort of catapulted the phrase digital public infrastructure into popularity as well on a scale of the summit. The second very important thing in the DPI space is that India's plan to build and maintain a global repository of all these softwares has sort of been approved by the G20 leaders as well. So, for example, let's take India's UPI and Brazil's equivalent, which is PIX, right? So, if PIX has a feature that the UPI in India wants to incorporate, and if Brazil is voluntarily sharing all the software on the global repository, India can very easily sort of accumulate that feature into the UPI as well. So what that helps is, what that does is that it helps all these sort of global major economies trust digital public infrastructure for the welfare of their own populations. The key major takeaway is the formation of the One Future Alliance. So the One Future Alliance is again a lot of like-minded countries coming together and planning how they can use digital public infrastructure for the welfare of these millions and crores of people that are there.
It is so necessary to have better, bigger, and more effective MDBs because the developmental demands from all across the globe is so high, these institutions will have to be better and bigger. This is also going to contribute to enhancing representation and voice of developing countries in the decision making. The second under the MDBs, strengthening of MDBs, is the G20 Independent Expert Group on strengthening MDBs, and this was established and it has submitted its volume 1. The first report, their report consists of 2 volumes. The first volume has already been submitted. The report recommends a triple agenda that dovetails with the call for the bigger, better, and more effective MDBs. The third point in strengthening MDBs is the agreement to collectively work towards boosting World Bank's financing capacity. Here, the options will be explored that will deliver a powerful boost to the IBRD headroom to support low-income and middle-income countries. And the fourth, endorsement for the G20 roadmap for implementation of the recommendations of an independent panel on capital adequacy framework of the MDBs. So the CAF recommendations are focused on enabling MDBs to use their existing resources effectively. The roadmap estimates, this is going to be of interest for the media, the roadmap estimates that implementation of the CAF and the measures thereby will potentially yield additional lending headroom of approximately $200 billion over the next decade. The global push for clearer policies on crypto assets has gained momentum under the Indian presidency, and a global consensus is emerging on the same. The presidency will support the IMF and the FSB, and FSB is also setting the contours of the regulatory framework for a globally coordinated approach to crypto assets.
As the summit drew to a close, it was topped off by a visit by Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the International Media Center. He came there directly after a string of bilateral meetings with the heads of Nigeria, Brazil, and the Netherlands. While he didn't make any comments or take questions, the hall was buzzing as the Prime Minister took in the laurels of a successful joint declaration. The G20 presidency next goes to another emerging economy, Brazil.
That's right. After that, we have South Africa in 2025, followed by the United States. It goes back to the United States in 2026. Now, Pragati Maidan's recent glow up, one could say, the Bharat Mandapam, will go down in history for a couple of reasons. One being for the fact that it has hosted so many world leaders in India. It walked the diplomatic tightrope on whether there will be a joint declaration or not. It also saw the inclusion of the African bloc or the African Union of 55 member nations. So these are all points of much importance. And, like you said, while the Prime Minister took what one could call a victory lap at the International Media Center, it also showed the gravitas with which this summit was conducted in India. The decibel of the audience, the sense of urgency in the air also reflects the theme of what was in G20 this time: one earth, one family, one future. So it all ties down together really quite well, actually. That's all we have for you. Stay tuned to BQ Prime as we bring you more updates on international policy and finance.
मैं ब्राजील के राष्ट्रपति और मेरे मित्र लूला डी सिल्वा को हार्दिक शुभकामनाएं देता हूं और मैं उनको प्रेसिडेंसी का गेवल सौंपता हूं।